I picked up a red and white can of Campbell's condensed chicken noodle soup, the kind that's been sitting on grocery shelves my whole life, and turned it over to read the fine print on the back. 4 of the brands on this shelf are hiding something. 2 of them aren't. And there's one word that shows up on this label before you even reach the fat content. I'm not going to tell you which word yet, but by the end of this, you'll know exactly where to look on your own can. Which one do you buy most? Campbell's, Progresso, Amy's, or Trader Joe's? Tell me in the comments before I go through all 4, because I want to see how many of you already have the answer sitting in your own cupboard right now. Soup is supposed to be the easy thing. It's the can you grab when you're tired, when someone in the house is sick, when you don't have the energy to cook anything from scratch. Campbell's and Progresso sit stacked together on nearly every soup aisle in nearly every chain store in this country. And most people choose between them the way I used to choose, by which one my mother bought, not by what was actually inside. My mother kept a shelf like that too, 3 cans deep, rotated by whichever was on sale that week. And it never once occurred to either of us to turn a can around. That's the part nobody stops to check. Think about how many nights a can of soup has stood in for an actual meal in your own house. A sick day, a late night after work, a child who won't eat anything else. That's exactly why this category deserves more scrutiny than it gets. Nobody reads carefully on the night they need soup fastest. The label doesn't change depending on how tired you are when you buy it, but your attention to it certainly does. And that gap between how much trust we put in these cans and how little we actually read them is where this entire video lives. So today I'm going can by can, brand by brand, and giving you a plain verdict on what's actually worth keeping in the pantry. I'll start with the one that started all of this for me, Campbell's Condensed Chicken Noodle. This is what the ingredient list shows. It's a condensed soup, which means water is listed as an ingredient you add yourself. And once you do, the sodium in that bowl is doing almost all of the work that flavour should be doing. Read the ingredient panel and you'll find salt appearing early, alongside monosodium glutamate and yeast extract working alongside it to carry the taste. The plain conclusion is this: a soup that leans on salt and flavour enhancers instead of on the chicken itself isn't really selling you chicken soup. It's selling you salt water with noodles in it. That is not chicken soup. That is what was left when the chicken was mostly gone. I bought this exact can for years, stacked 3 deep in my own cupboard, before I ever turned it over and read what I was actually feeding my family. I remember exactly the winter I finally sat down and read that can front to back, instead of just heating it and calling it dinner. I had made broth myself that same week, the slow way. Bones and water and hours on a low flame. And the difference between what I had simmered and what came out of that can was not subtle. It wasn't that the can tasted bad. It tasted like salt. And salt is easy to mistake for flavour when you're not paying attention. Do you ever compare a can you grew up on against something you made yourself? Or is the can still the standard you measure everything else by? Now, I want to be fair about something. Campbell's Chunky line is a different animal, and it deserves its own look. It's marketed as heartier, less diluted, meant to be eaten straight from the can without adding water. Read the label and the chicken does move up higher in the ingredient order, closer to the top, which does tell you something honest about what's inside. But the sodium content doesn't drop the way the Hearty branding implies it should. A bowl of this is still built around a very salt-forward profile, and the vegetables listed are often overshadowed by broth, starch, and seasoning blends before you reach anything resembling a full serving of actual vegetables. The conclusion is plain. A can can be less watered down and still be heavily salted. Chunky is a step up from condensed, but it is not the clean break the branding wants you to believe it is. Do you check where the meat sits in the ingredient list, or do you trust the picture on the label to tell you the truth? I used to trust the picture. It took me years of cooking my own broth from scratch before I even thought to question a picture on a can. But the one I want to get to next is the can that copies Campbell's format almost exactly, right down to the shelf placement. Progresso Traditional is the can most people grab as the healthier alternative to Campbell's, mostly because it isn't condensed and doesn't ask you to add water yourself. This is what I noticed reading the labels side by side with Campbell's. The broth is listed first, which is a genuinely good sign. It means the base of the soup is doing real work instead of being padded out. But keep reading, and salt appears early again, and several of the same flavour-carrying ingredients show up here too, just under a different brand name. The plain language conclusion is that not being condensed doesn't automatically mean not being salt-heavy. It just means you're paying for the water already added instead of adding it yourself. I learned to judge food before I learned to judge anything else. That part of me never left. And it's exactly why I stopped assuming not condensed meant not salty. Read that again if you need to. Those are two different questions, and Progresso Traditional only answers one of them well. Progresso also makes a rich and hearty line, positioned the same way Chunky is positioned against regular Campbell's. Bigger pieces, heartier broth, meant to be a full meal. And the pattern repeats almost exactly. Meat and vegetables move higher in the ingredient order, which is real and worth acknowledging. But the seasoning blend listed toward the middle of most of these varieties still leans on salt and yeast extract to do a lot of the flavour lifting. Here's where it gets worse than I expected when I first compared the two Hearty lines side by side. The ingredient orders between Campbell's Chunky and Progresso Rich and Hearty are close enough that reading one label practically tells you what the other one says. Two different names on two different cans, built from almost the same playbook. My own mother would have called that a family resemblance, and not the flattering kind. Have you ever set two competing brands side by side and actually read both labels in the same sitting? Try it with these two sometime. Keep the cans open on the counter and read straight down each list. The similarity is the whole point I'm making, not an exaggeration for the camera. If you've been keeping count, that's 4 cans from 2 brands, and none of them are the one I promised you at the start. Before I get to the 2 that actually earned a place in my pantry, I want to ask something plainly, because this is the part of the channel where I need you more than you need me. If reading a can the way I just did is something you want more of, not opinions, not guesses, just what the label actually says, then follow along here, because I go through a different kitchen shelf staple every week, and I'm not slowing down anytime soon. Every label has limits, and I won't pretend otherwise. Ingredient lists change. Companies reformulate, swap suppliers, adjust a recipe without changing the can art, sometimes without much warning at all. Availability also shifts by region. A variety sold in one part of the country might not be sold in another, or might be labelled slightly differently depending on where you're standing in the store. So take everything I've said as a starting point, not a permanent scorecard, and check your own can before you trust my memory of it. The label in your hand right now is the only one that matters today. Does your local store even carry all 4 of these? Or is your shelf already narrower than mine? That alone tells you something about where you're shopping. I've had viewers write to me before saying a can I described didn't match what they found on their own shelf. And every single time the answer was the same. A reformulation the company made quietly, sometimes months earlier, sometimes just for one region. That's not a reason to distrust everything on a label. It's a reason to read the one in your hand instead of trusting a memory, even mine. A verdict about a can is only ever as current as the last time somebody actually checked it. Now for the 2 that changed what I keep stocked. Amy's is the first, and it earns its place for a simple reason. Read the ingredient list, and it reads like a recipe, not a chemistry set. Organic vegetables, a clearly listed broth, seasonings you could name yourself without a label to explain them. That doesn't mean every single Amy's variety is automatically low in sodium. Some of their heartier varieties still carry a real amount of salt. And I won't pretend otherwise just because the front of the can says organic. But the ingredient order itself tells a cleaner story than anything from the first 4 cans. And that's worth something on its own. Do you check the ingredient order first, or the sodium number first? Because with Amy's, for once, both of them tend to agree with each other. The first time I made the switch to Amy's, it wasn't because of a review or a headline. It was because I ran out of the brand I always bought and grabbed whatever was closest on a busy shopping day. I almost put it back on the shelf out of habit. I'm glad I didn't, because reading that can at home afterward is what pushed me to start reading everything else the same way. The second is Trader Joe's, and specifically their low-sodium chicken broth, which I now keep as the base for nearly everything I cook at home. Read the label, and low sodium isn't just a phrase on the front. The ingredient list backs it up, with the broth itself doing the work instead of a heavy salt and enhancer blend covering for a thin base. I haven't bought a jar of the condensed stuff since I left that habit behind, and I don't plan to start again. This is the plainest verdict I can give you in this whole script. A broth built to be a starting point for your own seasoning is a broth that respects what you're capable of doing in your own kitchen. The third from Trader Joe's is their butternut squash soup, sold ready to heat, no water required. What I noticed reading this one is how short the ingredient list actually is compared to nearly everything else on this list. Squash, a short list of vegetables and seasonings, a cream or coconut base, depending on the variety, and not much else competing for space on the label. Short ingredient lists aren't automatically better in every case, but when the first several ingredients are recognizable foods rather than flavor-carrying additives, that's a conclusion you can draw honestly. That's the whole label, and that's exactly the kind of can I don't feel the need to second-guess before I open it. I still remember the first time I read a label that short and thought, this is what a pantry is supposed to look like. It reminded me of the way my mother used to describe a good meal. If you can't name every ingredient out loud without stumbling, it probably isn't a meal she'd have recognized. Here's the principle underneath everything I just walked you through. A brand name on the front of a can tells you almost nothing on its own. It tells you what a company wants you to assume. The only thing that tells you the truth is what's printed on the back, in order, without anyone standing over your shoulder explaining it to you. I learned that reading labels at a kitchen table long before I understood why it mattered. And it's the one habit from that life I never let go of. Nostalgia is not a nutrition fact, and a red label or a hearty name on a can is not an ingredient. Those things sell a feeling, And feelings are exactly what a shelf is designed to sell you. The ingredient list is the only part of the can that isn't trying to sell you anything at all. It's just reporting what's inside, in the order it appears, whether that flatters the brand or not. Here's your homework before you go. Go to your own kitchen right now, find whichever one of these 4 brands is already sitting on your shelf, turn it around, and tell me in the comments what the first 3 ingredients actually are. Not the front of the can, the back. So, the word I mentioned at the start, the one that shows up before you even reach the fat content on most of these labels, is salt. And now you know exactly which cans it's hiding in and which ones it isn't. And the can I promised you, the one I actually keep stocked now, is that Trader Joe's low-sodium broth, sitting where a stack of Campbell's condensed soup used to sit in my own cupboard. Read your own labels before you buy the next one. That's all I ever ask.